Hey everyone, today I wanted to do a quick live stream about some of the processes that we talk to our potential new customers. When we speak to them, we kind of ask them what their trip management process is, and this is they always come back to with kind of what they currently do. We have obviously lots of questions around that, and these are some of the sort of 6 issues that usually come up, some of the 6 things they're trying to solve. So I wanted to sort of do a quick video on those today and see if I can give you some quick action points to solve those sort of straight away. Okay, so 6 signs your trip management process needs improving. The first thing we always talk about is what is their initial authorization process. Now, depending on the size of the organization, so a school or college or primary school, they may say they don't have initial authorization. They just kind of, things just happen. They kind of just start organizing things. But when you actually dig down into it, they actually do have initial authorization. It's usually just something very informal. And that might just be a chat in the classroom. It may just be email. It may just be chat in the corridor or something like that. Something happens where they kind of just talk about potentially running this trip and it kind of gets authorized initially. But there's no sort of official documentation around that. And we always recommend having a correct process around that just to make sure the things that you're following things in the right order. We on an extreme sort of scenario, we've seen an example where a trip has been planned and sort of deposits have been paid, things have been committed to, and then when it goes for final authorization further down the line to say, oh, we're okay to kind of to travel this trip, there's disagreement from the SLT to say actually this we didn't even know this trip was happening, but then it was too late because they'd started paying suppliers and they weren't allowed to, from the cancellation policies, weren't allowed them to cancel, so they'd lose out on money. So they had to go ahead and travel this trip when actually it wasn't right for the sort of rest of the sort of school or college. So having a sort of a clear initial authorization policy and a documented policy, it just makes all that confusion go away, and it allows you to know that they sort of trip planner to know actually who they need to ask. Do they need to check that what other staff are in at that time, whether minibuses or other resources are available? Do they need to potentially go with two groups rather than just themselves? It kind of allows just everyone to talk about that and not someone to accidentally just go off on their own path and then kind of for them to bite them later. So we really recommend having a documented initial authorization process that will just make it life a lot easier, just to start the process off from the beginning. The next thing that is kind of linked to that previous one is that people worry about authorizations because they think it's just going to take too long to do. And you can't always improve that process, the speed of things, because people are busy. But one of the things you can improve on is definitely the visibility of where in the process, where in the steps of the process is that authorization at, and make it visible. So if you have a 3-step authorization process, maybe a EVC or to a head and to a head of department or something like that, or if you're in college, just head of department to principal or something, then a health and safety department, you have visibility of where it is in that chain, and so someone knows when they got. So it's a group leader. If I was a group leader, I could just check to see where it is in the process. Now, a really simple solution to that is no matter what system you're using, just add some, have a action point on whenever someone does an authorization, just to update a central, whether it's an Excel document, whether it's send an email off to someone, just update something that lets them know in digital format that anyone can look at any point to say, that's what I've just signed that piece off. So if they're the second in 3, then if I was a trip leader, I would know that the second person signed it off on this date, and I know then it's progressing and I know how long it's been. And just giving visibility on where the authorization is makes it a lot easier to makes it more clear and makes it feel less less anxiety around where that authorization is and submitting it thinking it's just gonna get lost in the ether. So yeah, definitely have processes to track where it is in the steps of authorization, rather than just sending it off and then only hearing back when it gets accepted or rejected. The next point we've mentioned is allocating students is hard. So this can vary depending on the size of whether it's a school, a small primary school, whether it's a sort of college. Obviously secondary schools kind of sit in the middle of those, about the sort of sizes, and kind of being able to just easily select who's going to be traveling on that trip. Now, if it's a small group, then if it's a small class, then very easy to choose that class. But maybe it's a subgroup, maybe it's a sports group, maybe it's a team within that, maybe it's a set of students with a set of criteria that are going on this trip. And it's just sometimes tricky to select who is going to go on this trip. So have the systems in place, have the easy way of being able to select who's going to be traveling on that trip. Just making it so you can easily select which groups each. So select a group and show all the people in that group. EduTrips has that functionality where it kind of, as well as linking the groups and the classes and the courses they're on, it can have subgroups, and it just allows your MIS system will usually allow you to tag which groups people are in. So just have that MIS data accessible somehow and easily sort of selected, because it's not just kind of putting the group name in there, it's also which students, and then do they need consent, and what's their requirements for traveling on a trip. So just having access to that information very quickly will definitely benefit a group leader when they're planning their trip. The next one is paper authorization forms. So paper, obviously, this can lead back into a lot of the things we mentioned earlier, but paper can get lost in the ether a bit. Again, piece of paper you don't necessarily know once you submit it, once you pass that into someone's in tray where that is. So as mentioned earlier, having a way of tracking that piece of paper as it goes around the system, so they know it's where it is. Hopefully you're away from that anyway. But if you do have paper authorization forms, make sure they're trackable, and just make sure that they're very clear on what the next steps are going to be when they fill out those forms. Obviously, we would definitely recommend moving away from paper authorization forms and paper trip management forms generally. Even just a good Excel sheet would be an improvement. So definitely having the amount of paper in your process definitely indicates there's a few issues there. And then the next one is risk assessment forms are hard to complete. This is definitely something that people mention to us a lot. Now, there's a lot of work gone into making these easier to complete. And these can be templated documents and using previous risk assessment forms. These are some obvious things, although we have been speaking to local authorities recently that are trying to get away from templated or reusing, because people don't necessarily update them correctly. They just kind of copy and paste and don't really read them, and it usually just causes issues further down the line when they're trying to get them authorized. So rather than using a templated copy, which can, as I say, can benefit, but having those clear guidance notes at each individual step. So rather than just having a single document that says this is how you fill out an assessment form, have it so when they click on the risk and they click on the threat level and they click on the details of that risk, just put in some detail, really specific detail about that risk and what that you should be looking for. So having those guided forms at each step, guided notes at each individual step, will just make it easier for them to feel confident to fill it in from scratch. Because, as most people know, is risk assessment forms aren't that hard once you kind of get what the purpose of those are and what you're trying to achieve when filling those in. So just having those clear guidance notes that are very specific to each individual potential threat can be really useful to help people just glide through those and complete those correctly and not having them sent back. And then sort of the final one is paper copies of everything. So one thing we find is that, again, mentioned earlier, the amount of paper in your system it's kind of an indicator of how much your processes maybe need to be updated. But what I'm talking specifically here is the paper copies of when they're traveling. So hopefully gone are the days that your group leaders are traveling with huge ring binders of folders with paper in there, with all student details, with cheat sheets, with guidance notes and all of that. Hopefully those days are gone. We do recommend. We understand that there's still a requirement for some paper, although we do work with schools that are completely 100% paperless when they're on trips. But we understand that some group leaders prefer having physical copies of stuff, and sometimes you need those if you're handing them over, obviously. So we understand paper isn't necessarily 100% gone, but you just got to try and trim down that paper folder as much as possible. As well as from a GDPR risk, we have heard stories of people taking student data with them and then leaving it on a train or leaving it on a bus or something like that, and obviously that's a huge GDPR issue there. So I definitely recommend trying to just look at how much paper gets taken away on your trip. Get rid of things like generic guidance notes and maps of cities and things you just don't need, that aren't really relevant to that specific group. We all have mobile phones. Hopefully you're able to provide electronic devices to your group leaders, maybe a tablet or something along those sort of lines. There are definitely ways of accessing some information. Just kind of look at what technology they have with them, see what they can access either in a digital format and what they need paper version. Hopefully, if you are sending out large ring binders or even sort of medium-sized ring binders, you can get that down to maybe just 2 or 3 pieces of paper that they desperately need, and hopefully in the future you can maybe get that down to 0. But we understand that depends on the group leader, really. So there are sort of 6 of our kind of key things that people always mention to us as we sort of help them improve their trip management processes. Obviously, EduTrips kind of covers off all of those problems and helps guide them to a better solution. But I think there's definitely some actionable things where you can just take some very simple sort of Excel documents and just kind of having visibility of where things are at. And there's definitely some actionable points you can take just to get them ready for when trips start traveling. Obviously in September, you can start doing day trips again, and hopefully soon we'll start being able to do residentials, and then maybe beyond that sort of overseas. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. But thank you very much for watching, and yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. Put them in the comments below, or sort of send us an email, and yeah, we'll definitely get back to you. Thanks very much.